A young black woman was asked to give up her VIP seat to an older white passenger. There were no threats, no arguments, no shouting. But with one firm phone call, calm enough to silence the entire business class cabin, the entire crew and more than a few privileged frequent flyers paid the ultimate price for a moment of arrogance. What would you do if someone thought your position should be theirs, just because of their age, skin color, or because they are used to being given priority? The woman's composure and courage turned an act of arrogance into a valuable lesson in boundaries, fairness, and dignity, all on what seemed like an ordinary flight. In all fairness, no one in first class that day will ever forget it. What would you do if you were in Ava's shoes? Don't look away. This is a story of quiet strength, unexpected twists, and thought-provoking shifts in power. The narrow aisle of the business class cabin stretched out before Ava Coleman, reflecting warm yellow lights through the polished surfaces. She walked slowly, maintaining a calm and confident demeanor, although deep in her eyes there was a sharp alertness. The VIP seat, located in the first row by the window, was a symbol of power in the luxurious and sophisticated space of this business-class flight, with soft cream-colored leather and a spacious space that many people dream of. Around them, the other passengers were settling into their seats, but the atmosphere in the cabin was anything but peaceful. Eyes darted past Ava, undisguised, with a mixture of surprise and wariness. A low murmur rose from nearby groups like a silent wind, but enough to sense the underlying tension, wordless but meaningful. Ava didn't let the stares faze her. She sat down in the VIP seat, proudly but warily, silently accepting the attention as an inevitable challenge. The mixture of pride and quiet wariness provided a delicate backdrop to the story that was about to unfold on this flight. A story that wasn't just about a seat, but about prejudices waiting to explode. A small bell rang as the last passengers settled into their seats, the gentle roar of the engines signaling the start of the flight. The silence was abruptly interrupted when Greg Miller, a middle-aged white man in a sharp suit but with an arrogant gaze, rose from the back seat and walked slowly toward Ava Coleman. His every step marked a presence that was oppressive, an uninvited presence with a clear purpose. Greg stopped beside the VIP seat, his eyes filled with disdain and dissatisfaction as he looked straight at Ava, who was sitting calmly but not backing down. His voice rang out, decisive and authoritative. "Excuse me, could you give me this seat? I reserved this seat." From those words, it was not just a simple request, but also a hidden declaration of power and priority. The air seemed to stop for a moment. All eyes turned to Ava, waiting for her reaction. The feeling of tension began to spread, seeping through every crack in the business-class cabin, thick and heavy. Ava didn't answer right away. Her eyes were an invisible challenge, deep and uncompromising. She raised her head, looking straight at Greg with a quiet confidence, as if to say that this position was her right, not something to be traded or conceded. Her silence created an invisible wall, blocking out the unreasonable expectations Greg wanted to impose. The atmosphere in the cabin became more stifling. The whispers and furtive glances increased, stirring up a wave of unspoken unease. Some passengers sighed softly, while others tried to avoid eye contact, as if not wanting to get involved in this conflict, but also unable to take their eyes off the scene unfolding. Greg refused to simply let it go, raising his voice, prolonging the demand sarcastically. "I think you should understand where your seat is, especially when someone has booked a ticket in advance." The arrogance in that voice fanned a small flame, threatening to burn down the fragile peace of the business-class cabin. But Ava, with her calm, trained through many trials, remained firm, not responding, but her eyes never leaving the man, a wordless affirmation that she would not back down in the face of injustice. The tension was stretched to the limit, forming a knot that could not be easily released. As the minutes passed, the air became more and more dense with unresolved tension, making everyone around unable to help but feel that something bigger, deeper, was about to explode right on this flight. As soon as Greg Miller's firm request rang out, the business-class cabin immediately became subtly chaotic, like a beautiful painting hastily painted with uneven strokes. From the end of the corridor, Lisa Carter, the flight crew chief, walked in with a look of hesitation that anyone could feel. Her legs were no longer as steady as before. Each step seemed to be weighing between protecting the rights of passengers and the pressure from her colleagues and the expectations of the airline's management. Lisa exchanged quick glances with her colleagues nearby, whose faces displayed a complex mix of emotions and attitudes. Some of the crew members flashed approval of Greg, their eyes twinkling with silent agreement, as if Greg's words were an unquestionable command. Others, however, remained silent, maintaining the respect they had for Ava Coleman, a guest who was not only the CEO of a major company but also a symbol of values that many sought validation for. The atmosphere in the cabin was tense, with invisible forces, wordless sighs, fleeting glances that spoke volumes of unexpressed emotions. The divisions within the crew clearly reflected the deep conflicts that lurked beneath the glitzy surface of air service. It was not just a small debate between individuals, but also a sign of the invisible pressure from prejudice, from power differentials, and from people themselves in a challenging working environment. Lisa, though hesitant, remained in her role as dispatcher, trying to find a solution in the face of a seemingly endless situation. But it was clear that the pressure on her shoulders came not only from the overwhelming requests, but also from a complex operating system where every small decision could spark a storm far greater than the seemingly peaceful flight. The story continues like a never-ending stream, carrying with it questions, hopes, and injustices that have yet to be revealed, as the truth about how people deal with differences begins to emerge through every action, every look, every unspoken word. And from here, this flight will not only be a journey through space, but also a challenge for courage and justice, for both Ava and those around her. The air in the business class cabin was still thick with tension, like an invisible curtain covering everyone. Ava silently observed the looks, gestures, and soft whispers that had not stopped, like needles stabbing at her self-esteem and that of every passenger watching. The crew, under invisible pressure from both passengers and superiors, still tried to maintain normalcy, but clearly the lines of anxiety were clearly visible on their faces. Greg Miller kept looking at Ava with challenging and disapproving eyes, while the other passengers began to take sides, whispers and discussions growing louder, creating a layer of chaotic but discreet sound like a silent storm about to explode. The cautious footsteps of the crew walking back and forth, the small but tense exchanges over the intercom, all created a vivid but stifling picture, making anyone in the cabin feel the weight of the impending injustice. Everything seemed to quiet down for a brief moment as the captain announced that they were preparing to land. The safety bell rang, seatbelts were tightened, and the cabin lights dimmed, giving way to a tense silence before the emotional storm inside was unleashed as the plane touched down. And in that moment, Ava knew that her fight would not end in the air, but would continue on the ground, where she could use all the evidence and voices to force the truth to be known. The flight finally touched down on the runway, the sound of the wheels rolling on the hard pavement and the urgent screech of the brakes echoed in the cabin, signaling an ending that was not as peaceful as expected. The bright lights of the airport slowly spread through the windows of the business class cabin, covering everything with a gentle layer of light, as if preparing for the upcoming turning point, not only of the flight, but of the entire story. When the fasten your seatbelt sign turned off, Ava Coleman didn't hesitate to pull her phone from her bag, the light of the screen reflecting off her face with a quiet force, a stern challenge to the outside world. The plane was now in cellular range, allowing her to connect fully, no longer limited by airplane mode or weak Wi-Fi. It was the moment she officially opened the door to dialogue, not just to reflect, but to demand justice. Ava's voice came through the line, calm and firm, detailing every detail, from passenger Greg Miller's blatant request to change seats, to the inconsistent handling of the flight crew, to their biased and unprofessional attitudes, all of which painted a complex picture of discrimination and injustice hidden behind vague rules and empty apologies. Each word was like a sharp arrow, deftly piercing the cloak of silence and evasion that the airline tried to maintain. On the other end of the line, the answer came in a polite voice, but behind it were vague, roundabout sentences, like a cleverly constructed screen to avoid direct responsibility. We are very sorry for the inconvenience you experienced. However, you also understand that internal regulations and policies of the airline are mandatory to follow. That explanation did not provide a clear answer to why a passenger could arbitrarily request a seat change while the crew silently endured or even tolerated it. Those clever answers were no different from an excuse for invisible prejudices that crept into every step of service, making Ava realize a serious inconsistency in the way the airline handled the incident. Not one to be cowed by the evasive rhetoric, Ava tactfully but firmly pressed the company to make a clear commitment to protect the rights of customers, eliminate all forms of discrimination, and ensure true justice. She emphasized that her story was not just hers, but that she was speaking on behalf of those who still suffer from silent injustice in their daily lives, demanding urgent and serious change. Her eyes lit up as she spoke, each word lighting an unquenchable fire, spreading the power of justice. The call ended with Ava's calm yet determined demeanor, as if she had planted an undeniable seed of change in the system. Putting the phone down, she knew that she had not let the incident fall into oblivion, and that today's words would be the first step to opening a new chapter where justice was no longer a distant dream. Outside, the airport bustled with the arrival of new flights. But in the business class cabin, Ava's story rose to become a powerful symbol of resilience and justice, a poignant reminder that, no matter where we are, the right to respect and fairness must always be taken seriously and protected, not denied or forgotten. And at that moment, the airline began to act, preparing for a turning point decision, a decision that would change the fate of those behind the incident on this flight. Less than 24 hours after the flight landed, an emergency meeting was held at the airline's headquarters, where important decisions were made behind closed doors, but their impact could ripple far and wide. On the big screen in the control room, excerpts from passenger reports, images extracted from security cameras, and internal reports appeared one after another, stitching together every detail of the incident, so clear that it was undeniable. The senior executive, after receiving all the information from the complaints department and the legal department, made the final conclusion, a conclusion that was both decisive and thought-provoking. The entire crew on the business class flight that day will be fired, effective immediately. The news was not announced loudly, but it spread like a silent shock within the aviation industry. An email with a simple subject line, "Human Resources Notice, Urgent," was sent to each member of the relevant flight crew. Just a few lines, but containing a weight that cannot be measured by words. And then, in a corner of the small office, people saw a scene of a chief flight attendant sitting silently in front of the screen, her hands shaking slightly as she read each word, while in the hallway outside, a few other employees quietly left with their personal bags in hand, their faces mixed with surprise, disappointment, and helplessness. Some people reacted harshly, questioning the fairness of this decision, but others nodded silently, as if deep down they understood why it happened. A few sighs, a few averted glances, and a few quick calls to inform family members, all paint a picture of an unvarnished but powerful reality. It is no longer a debate about right and wrong, but the inevitable consequences of a system that fails to uphold the fundamental values of service, fairness, respect, and dignity. The airline belatedly has sent a clear message that silence in the face of injustice, even for a few brief moments in the air, is enough to cost a team their careers. Elsewhere, when Ava accidentally learned of the decision through a short message on her phone, she neither smiled nor sighed. She simply hung up the phone and quietly looked out the window where the afternoon sun was pouring down. In that light, a part of the truth was brought to light. A part of justice was spoken, although she knew that behind that administrative decision, there were still unanswered questions. What had caused apathy to become so widespread? How many times before had someone suffered without anyone knowing their name? But at least for this moment, something has changed. No more empty apologies or hollow commitments, but real action, concrete, decisive, and capable of creating a wake-up call, not just for an airline, but for a system in need of self-reflection. The fragile dusk was slowly falling on the horizon. The last light of the day was not too bright, nor completely extinguished, but enough to tint the sky with gold and remind one of something being healed in silence. Ava gently pulled her rolling suitcase beside her, walking slowly down the long hallway leading to the reception area. Each step she took on the polished stone floor seemed to leave a quiet echo in the space, not the sound of anger or triumph, but the sound of someone who had just walked through a storm and understood that the true movement lies in the deepest place, where one chooses not to retreat. Before leaving, she stopped by an empty row of seats near the window. Outside, planes were still taking off and landing, the steady rhythm of a world that always moves, sometimes too fast for people to realize that behind each flight, each ticket, is a real-life story with emotions and dignity that cannot be measured by class or brand. Ava's eyes gently turned to the sky, where the sunset spread like a layer of silent velvet. In that scene, there was no distinction between who was a passenger and who was a service staff. No business class or economy class. Only people and dignity were recognized equally in the vastness. What happened on that flight may have ended with a firing email, an executive order, or a brief newspaper story, but its echoes continue to resonate, not as a temporary scandal, but as a warning about power and responsibility, about the dangers of silence, and about the miracles that can happen when one person decides not to turn a blind eye. Ava was no movie hero, no title or stage to her name, but she stood up when it would have been easier to look away. She didn't shout, but she made the system listen. And now, as she leaves that scene, the story is no longer hers. It has been sent into a larger stream, where millions of people read, listen, and wonder. What would you do if you witnessed injustice? If you were forced to choose between convenience and courage, which would you choose? Because perhaps justice is not a destination, but a journey of people who dare to take a step. Even if it is just a small step, but a step towards the light. And sometimes the only thing needed to start the change is an ordinary person to say what everyone else keeps silent.